Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today, and I thank Pravin and Maren for this opportunity and this invitation. So today, I'm presenting a topic. My presentation title is "Externalizations to International Elements in the Education Policy Making in Portugal," and this is part of my PhD dissertation, which I defended already in 2022. So I start by presenting my overall research design, which is a bit complex in itself. It comprises 5 publications, 4 were research articles, and then the dissertation I managed to do something that could stand in its own feet as a piece of research. So in a total of 5. And my time frame of analysis was 2001 to 2018. 2018 is when I collected my data. And then 2001 was when PISA results were launched for the very first time in December. And this was important because the first aim of my study was to analyze how PISA influences the reference societies used in education discussions in Portugal. And I wrote actually my first article, which was a systematic literature reviews. So my first data set was articles that were published on exactly this topic of how PISA influences the reference societies in education. And then I submitted, and then I started using the second data set, which was parliamentary debates. And while I was doing that analysis for my second article, I came to understand that neither PISA nor its achievers were actually a reference in the Portuguese parliamentary debates in a plenary until much later than its first results. So the first PISA reference was in 2005, and then just like one, and then there was another 1 or 2 in 2007, and it only came a bit more common probably after, if I remember well, 2009. But by then I had already realized that I had to change my research questions because I made the wrong assumption. I assumed that PISA was a reference and the reference societies was also a reference, coming from, for example, Finland as top performer or so, but it wasn't. So then I adapted my research questions was the first move. And it was then at this stage that I understood that I would develop an adaptive research style, meaning that the research processes, empirical and theoretical aspects were polished, and then the research proceeded, and both are successively reinterpreted in the light of each other instead of just follow some hypothesis. So then my research questions became what factors influenced the selection of international elements used in a discussion of education, and how the international elements used how were they used in discussions of education in the Portuguese Parliament and print media. So my third data set was print media articles. Why print media articles? It's because back then, when in 2001, many of the newspaper didn't have a virtual version, so they were only printed. So I decided, since I had to be in a national library, I could just collect them all in print form, and that's what I did for the time frame. So that's it. Besides my systematic literature review and the articles that I analyzed for it, I also analyzed almost 3,000 pages of parliamentary debates. I don't know how it is in other countries actually, but in Portugal, there is a journal, or it's a journal of ipsis verbis of what is said in a parliament, in a plenary, when there is plenary discussion. So then they are uploaded in a parliament webpage, and you can go there and just download them and use them as you want. It's public data. Sometimes it can happen for technical issues. You might not access some of them. The link is broken or something, but in general, most of them are there. So very rich and easy to access data. And then the print media articles, as I said. So regarding to my theories, I started in my research plan, I thought I would use only externalizations to world situations from Shriver as my theoretical lenses. But then as the analysis developed, I realized that this wouldn't be enough for me to do what I wanted to do. And I really wanted to understand the dynamics of the policy making first, and then also the actors' strategies itself. How do they interact with each other? What strategies do they use to convince others? So then I started adding theories and lenses, not leaving externalizations to all situations. That became more, it was still informing my analysis, and it was basically almost like my object of analysis. And then I added theories of the policy process, such as multiple streams approach from John Kingdon, and then epistemic governance from Perti Alasuutari and Ali Qadir from actually my university here in Tampere. Then for the media, I used thematization theory, which is a theory coming from Luhmann and his social systems theory, and then this theory was developed by his followers after his death. And what says is that, for example, in the case of the media, they choose a few themes to discuss and make a narrow view, in this case of education, what is important in education and what should we be looking at education. Then methodologically, I did qualitative content analysis to the whole data set. And then I thought it was also not enough because I couldn't narrow my view to focus in specific aspects that I wanted to pay attention to. So I added rhetorical analysis when I used the theory, the epistemic governance framework. And in this way, I could focus more like on appeals, for example, that the policymakers were making to their audience, and focus more on ethos, pathos, and logos. So the strategies that were used related to this. Then when I used thematization theory, I also used frame analysis. And the frame analysis emerged as useful because I realized there was a way that not only the themes that were discussed in the print media articles was very consistent, and many others were left out, but they were framed in different ways. So there was like a reduction, but then again, an increase of how things were discussed. So I wanted to identify these frames. So I did a second layer of analysis. Then I used descriptive statistics to make my data more visual and my findings more visual, and I used it in all the articles. Then in a dissertation, the dissertation consists of a meta-interpretation of the article's findings and conclusions. And also I realized that without declaring it before, I was all along using this onto-epistemological background of complexity thinking. This is mostly called complexity theory. I don't think it's a theory because there is several different theories inside of complexity theory. So I like to call it complexity thinking. So it's a way that we think about the problems we are analyzing and how can you learn more about them. So complexity thinking enables an examination of the interactions instead of the objects of analysis. So the interactions between the elements and the dynamics that are created inside the system to understand complexities that are manifested then at the system level. But today I'm mostly focusing on the article I published and on analysis I did using epistemic governance framework, because I think it's a framework that's not often used and it's very interesting. So I decided that it's useful and something new. But let's then start with explaining the concepts. Externalizations, what they are, for those that don't know, it's a concept that also comes from Luhmann systems theory, which emphasizes a system shift in modern societies from self-referentiality to external referentiality. So Luhmann says that all systems like the education system, the political system, the economical system, there is one worldwide, and usually they are functionally closed. So they do their own thing, And they do this auto-poiesis and self-referentiality, and they carry on like that. But every now and then, in order to continue this auto-poiesis process, it needs to open cognitively to its environment, and those are externalizations. So he identifies three kinds of externalizations, and they are externalizations to scientific rationality, which are references that are claiming to be scientific or rational. For example, references to research. Nowadays, references to international large-scale assessments are often used. And one reference a reference to an element can correspond to different kinds of reference. Can be scientific rationality at the same time being a reference to an international element. Then reference to tradition and values, which corresponds to ideologies and core values and so on. And then reference to organization, so specific forms of management or attainment of efficiency and so on. And then Jürgen Schriver added to comparative education the externalization to world situation thesis. And he says that these are references to practices and policies of other places. It offers pointers and options, relevant insights of how we should or should not do something and what is best. And yeah, I agree with him. And then he says that also coming from Luhmann that there is a sociologic that is based on local cultural values of societal conditions or societal conditions and events that leads to the use of certain world situations as authority tools of legitimacy. But then when I was doing my dissertation, so the last publication, I came to realize that I didn't feel that externalization to world situations encapsulated everything that I identified on my data. So I decided to call it externalizations to international elements, which then includes these practices and policies of other countries, so reference societies. But it also includes things like the reports of the international organizations, the results of ILSAs, also maybe specific people that said something, and then it becomes authoritative in specific contexts, or even there are international organizations themselves, or international events, like in a conference where, like now, we talk a lot about the COP29, I think it is, and when we discuss climate change, and sometimes agreements are signed during those conferences. So these are international events. So then that's how I call it, the externalizations to international elements. Now more focused on what is the epistemic framework. So the epistemic governance framework focuses on social changes in modern societies. It is an additional layer, analytical layer, in the study of how power is developed and handled. And it specifically analyzes the dynamics of governance and policymaking. So it is a framework that helps analyzing attempts to influence others' understandings of the world, and to understand how the speakers persuade the audience to act according to their own interests, so to the speaker's interest. Therefore, the object of analysis of this framework is epistemic work developed by policymakers. And the epistemic work is precisely that: persuasion of others, and on the suitability or inadequacy of certain ideas and proposals to solve the problems and the discussions by appealing to their audiences, the speakers' audiences, desires, reasoning, and emotion. So the epistemic governance framework is a complex framework that integrates several components, as the image shows, including objects of epistemic work, imageries, and authority, epistemic capital. The broader idea is that epistemic work strategically develops simultaneously around three objects, and you can see here in the image epistemic work. So authority elements, epistemic capital, forms, imageries, and these two together are acting on three objects of the epistemic work, which is the ontology of environment, actor identifications, and norms and ideals. And these are basically the constructions of what the world is, who we are, and what is good or desirable. Due to time limitations, today I'm just focusing on epistemic capital because I think it connects very well with externalizations or references in the epistemic work that is developed in the Portuguese parliamentary debates when discussing education, so in plenary. So externalizations as epistemic capital. So epistemic capital is a cumulative collection of all kinds of resources that can be used as knowledge and validation basis for the arguments presented. So they don't have to be references to international elements. They can be references to anything that brings validation and authority to the argument presented that can strengthen these arguments. They are crucial in the epistemic work developed by political and social actors involved in policymaking. And Alasuutari and Qadir identified 4 types of sources of authority. They are capacity-based when they are referring to people, organizations, and objects as respectful within a social system. Ontological, referring a person, text, or institution used as accurately presenting the world and the debated situation. Moral, when there is the references to well-accepted principles or rules. And charismatic. Charismatic is when they refer to a person or institution because, for example, of their talents, acts of rights, or rights of office. In the Portuguese parliamentary debates analyzed, most sources of authority are capacity-based and ontological type. So to understand how epistemic work develops, one needs to identify which sources of authority are used and why they are selected among all possible elements available. For example, in Portugal, when they are nowadays discussing inclusion, never the Declaration of Salamanca comes on board anymore. Maybe on a past shortly after it was signed, but not now. I had a question from somebody asked me, why you never mentioned, for example, this? And I said, well, this is totally inexistent. So moving on, what are the factors that I identified as affecting the choice of external elements used in a parliamentary discussion? So above all is the assumptions of political and social actors about their audiences. And this is very important because they have to be strategic and pay attention to the audience they are going to speak to and what this audience is expecting or is thinking. Because to be useful, the elements referenced must be recognized as valid by the audiences. Otherwise, they have no effect. They don't strengthen the arguments. And these assumptions are related with 3 aspects of the audiences. So the audience's perception of reality, for example, what is the problem? What needs to change, for example? Identification of entities with authority, and then perception of what is positive or negative, acceptable, unacceptable, good or bad. Then also another factor that seems to be very important is its availability. For example, when finally pieces started being relevant in the Portuguese parliamentary debates, they became relevant mostly after the launch of the results, because that's when they were right there available. Policymakers are very busy. They don't have time to research what would be more efficient and think and analyze and then plan ahead very well. So being promptly it's a big help. So they grab what is promptly and that they assume the audience would accept. Then historical paths and international relations built over time. This is something that other authors like Florian Waldo and Gitte Steimer-Kamsi already mentioned in their research, that often the relationships between imagine 2 countries can affect, or a country and an organization can affect the use of that country or institution as sources of authority. For for example, in Portugal, OECD and EU have been very, very relevant since the OECD, even before the end of the authoritarian regime that we had until 1974, was already influential in development and education. For example, with the project of the Mediterranean. And then interactions among actors inside and outside the system. So the personal interactions of certain policymakers, or the alignment of the ideas between different actors that are inside the political system, but also outside, can have a strong influence. And then also international elements and policy ideas selected by other actors. And I identify that the truth is, if a proposal, for example, in policy proposals, if it's too innovative, it rarely gets general consensus easily. So they try to align in certain way with past policies they already selected, or policy proposals that are from other actors already, or relate somehow with that. So, and then also allowing the blurred and broad use. And I think in Portugal, this is very relevant, and you will see that in the next slide. It is it's much less likely to be questioned by opposition actors. If I say, for example, that in Finland, imagine I'm a policymaker in a parliament, and I say that in Finland there is no homeworks. And imagine one of the members of the parliament just came to Finland and he knows that there is homework. Then he's easily contested. If I say in some European countries there is no homeworks and the kids still perform well, it's much more blurred, and then there is no time, in a short time they have in a parliament to talk. There is no time to dwell into much contestation unless the space is already open for that immediately. So here you can say, just so you have an idea what externalizations are used in a Portuguese parliament. And you can see they are all blurry, basically, or almost. And PISA is not on the top at all. EU countries and EU are the main. EU countries as a regional reference society. So not Spain or France or England, or no, it's not part anymore, Germany or so. It's in the EU countries, or all over the European countries, or something like that. And that constitutes a great percentage of the quotations. It's present in many of the quotations with references, external references, about 28%. Then you have EU, it's the second most used, 13%, and then the OECD comes. And then Bologna. Bologna is on the top, Bologna Declaration, but it's a very special kind of reference, because it happens in a certain time when Portugal was adapting its higher education policies in order to integrate the aspects included in a Bologna Declaration. And then, so between 2005 and 2009, then they disappeared, and there is not one single reference to Bologna Declaration after that. Then PISA comes in fifth, and you see it's just included in 9% of the total quotations with external references. Then you can see again OECD countries, several countries, international comparisons, and so on. So, and how are these externalizations used? So first of all, when the conversation is about contested policies not earning the necessary political and popular support. So when we in comparative education, for example, when we talk about externalization, sometimes I had the perception before I did my study that there's plenty of them, but actually it's not true. Again, the system will self-reference until it can no longer function if it doesn't. So the references to external elements is always a last resort. It's when it's extremely necessary and consensus are not gathered, basically. And then they are used as strategics, exactly to respond to emergency needs of sources of authority that can validate the arguments that are not kind of sticking. Then they are used as projection screens that help decontextualize and depoliticize policy ideas and proposals. This is an idea that I think it was Florian Waldo, the first one that mentioned this, at least from the literature I read. So basically what it means is what happens, for example, in Finland, it's totally irrelevant. What the OECD said, it's totally irrelevant. What is relevant is the policy idea that the local actors want to push forwards, and then they project it in another country that, or in another institution that is perceived by the audience in as being valid. Or yes, for example, you can refer Finland and then say that, yes, we have to take stress from children because children in Finland have no stress and they love school and school is so pleasant. In reality, it's not true. Actually, Finland is having a bit of a problem because a big percentage of students apparently say that they do not like school and that they find it stressful and demotivated. So it doesn't matter. What matters is internationally or in a specific context, Finland is perceived by the audiences as being this calm, stress-free education system that does not push their students above their limits, that don't have national assessments and stuff like that. And that is what is important. It's the perception of the audience. And then they are used as tools that are perceived as helping to reduce the policymaking process complexity. And I come back to this in the next slide. And then their references to the same international element might be given different meanings, depending on the characteristics of the specific context and who the speaker and the audiences are. And this is exactly what I was talking before. And I have an interesting example, which is this OECD report that came at some stage that was really used in the parliament in Portugal, but they were used by everybody, from the left to the right of the political spectrum, and they were used to advocate for very different policies or policy proposals. For example, the right would say, yes, the OECD said that we have to maintain students in school and increase the qualifications of the Portuguese people, because this is the only way that the country economy will develop. And this is something that's really important in Portugal, because we are always in the edge of just go bankrupt or something. And then the left focused the argument in totally different, but still using the same argument, the same report, which is, oh, we need to make a school that students like to be in, and that encourages the students to proceed, because without an education, people are not able to have a good quality of life and fulfill their max potential. So you see two different arguments, but still the same reference. So as main conclusions, international elements constitute, as I said, a useful source of authority that are used by social and political actors as strategic tools for the delegitimation or legitimation of policy ideas and proposals. So normally I delegitimate my opponent's arguments and I use it to legitimize my own arguments. And usually it's the ones that are struggling to achieve the necessary consensus for the initiation of social change. The ultimate goal of this strategy is to manage the policy process's contingency and reduces its complexity by focusing on the audience's attentions on a few problems only, and then offering one or a few policy solutions supported by evidence, so they say, and knowledge from the international dimension. However, in the Portuguese context, the frequent use of the same international elements by different actors, often advocating contradictory ideas and proposals, has sustained the complexity of the policy process, leading to the failure of several attempts to advance comprehensive reform plans. And this has been happening for a very, very long time, I think since I was a kid probably. So every government brings their own ideas and they advocate for their own ideas, and often they do not get consensus and ideas don't go forwards, or just a little bit of it goes forward. So there is this incremental change and constant change, not only incremental, is constant. but nothing ever big or radical. Then process of education policy making, we can say, are more complex than often is assumed and contradictory to the original policy making intentions, using references to international elements in attempts to reduce this complexity can actually end up increasing it. So thank you very much for your attention. I hope I wasn't too long or too boring. This is the most relevant publications that I have actually, this is the all publications I have on these topics under my dissertation. So it's my dissertation publications. And then they are all open access. And then this is references to some literature, some of the literature that I used. And I think that Pravin, for example, can share the slides if he wants. I can send it to him.
All right.
Thank you.